In 1795, after the third partition, Russia, Prussia and Austria made Poland disappear from every map, leaving the Polish nation wrongfully hurt. But as Voltaire, the 18th century philosopher and writer, said, injustice in the end produces independence. So in 1918, after 123 years of Poland being present only in literature, art and music, our country was ready to reclaim its independence. In 1914, a Polish politician and diplomat, Michał Sokolnicki, wrote, "Nobody in the world wants Poland," and yet 4 years later it appeared on all the maps. What happened?
It was the result of a process that began already when the First Polish Republic was losing its independence. At that time, the very idea of Polish sovereignty passed into the hands of a relatively small group of educated elites. They carried that idea forward, and it endured for 123 years. Over the 4 years, the international context of the First World War changed so profoundly that Poland returned on the map because Poles became needed again. In a war that was bleeding armies dry without decisive breakthroughs or major territorial gains, in the era of trench warfare, soldiers were in high demand. It was also in our own interest to emphasize that, even if only symbolically, we were capable of self-determination, since we had our own representative in the form of a national army. After all, General Halle's Blue Army, formed in part through the efforts of the Polish National Committee, numbered around 70,000 soldiers. That was already a significant military force, one capable of breaking through the front in some sectors. The act of November 5th also did not appear out of nowhere. It was an illusory promise of a future Polish state, albeit in a limited and dependent form, offered jointly by the German and Austrian occupiers. It was above all about finding recruits, about securing military strength. It was this global conflict that made the Polish question, the Polish voice, and the bargaining over Poland's future suddenly matter.
Despite being parted by 3 foreign invaders, Polish nation always craved for being united again. For 123 years, various uprisings and political, national and patriotic bursts, like taking over the arsenal during the November uprising, proved that we were yearning for freedom. Unfortunately, we had to wait for a global conflict called the Great War to be given it back. During the game for independence, were we more pawns or players?
We were determined to be players, and we did everything to achieve that. Credit must be given to our political leaders, both to Piłsudski's camp and to Roman Dmowski and his collaborators. They all strove to ensure Poland would be a subject, not an object, of international politics. It was not an easy task. For Dmowski's group, the answer was strong diplomatic positioning and alliances. For Piłsudski's camp, that Poland must have real military power. Only then would others take us seriously. Ignacy Paderewski and the United States played a major role in ensuring that the Polish National Committee was formally recognized as the official, no longer merely informal, representative of the Polish cause. work then began to form a Polish army, with many of its recruits coming from the United States.
From 1915 till 1918, Ignacy Paderewski gave over 300 concerts and speeches in the United States, always emphasizing the need for Polish independence. And even before the United States joined the First World War, President Woodrow Wilson said, "Dear Mr. Paderewski, I can tell you that Poland will be resurrected and will exist again."
A major turning point came when Britain, France, Italy, and later the United States recognized the Polish National Committee as the de facto Polish government in exile. Of course, it was not a de jure government, but from that moment, the debate was no longer about whether Poland would exist, but what kind of Poland it would be, and to what extent it would have the right to self-determination. Because at that point, in the vision of the partitioning powers, Poland too was meant to be reborn, though in a more illusory and limited form perhaps.
What were the chances that our three invaders would take part in one war, on two sides, and they would all lose?
This marked the end of the Ancien regime, an old order whose fall had long been coming, foreshadowed since the Crimean War and the Franco-Prussian War, when even dynastic ties between the partitioning powers could not prevent them from clashing. It wasn't just about imperial ambitions, it was also about social and industrial revolutions transforming Europe. Economies began to need war, and societies began to crave revolution, a process that, in its extreme and tragic form, led to events like the Russian Revolution of 1917. The collapse of that old world was inevitable, and not only because of the ambitions of the empires that had once divided Poland.
Your loss is my gain. And this saying had never been as accurate as in 1917, where the October Revolution broke out. This event marked the end of the Imperial Russia and helped then non-existing Poland to fight for its independence. The 11th of November 1918 for the entire world marked the end of the Grand War, later described as the First World War. But what did it mean for Poland?
Above all, this marked the beginning of very hard work. A large portion of the inhabitants of the pre-partition Polish lands viewed Poland as a temporary state, something that had suddenly fallen upon them. It was difficult for them to grasp that, at this moment, they were becoming residents of Poland, citizens of a state that had returned after 123 years. But ultimately, it was a success of Poles as a community, a success of this long march toward independence. Without holding on to this self-awareness, this commitment to the idea and tradition, the opportunity created by the First World War might never have been seized. It was an opportunity that Poles themselves made real, and that is something they can truly be proud of.
Longing for Poland's independence was carved in people's hearts and minds and fueled by the works of Sienkiewicz, Mickiewicz and Słowacki, paintings of Jan Matejko and music of Frédéric Chopin. The independence was finally regained, but their legacy is still with us. Every success has its own story, and the story of Polish independence was 123 years long and had many fathers. And the most important names in 1918 were Józef Piłsudski, Ignacy Paderewski and Roman Dmowski. Who was Roman Dmowski?
The leader.
He was the leader of the Polish right, national and conservative. A diplomat, and a man who played a key role in preparing the ground to bring the Polish question onto the international stage. His greatest moment came during the Paris Peace Conference, where he first represented Poland alone, and later alongside Ignacy Jan Paderewski.
Roman Dmowski famously said, "I'm Polish, therefore I have Polish obligations." But were they essentially Polish or personally his? Hard to say, but we cannot deny his strength to diplomatically bargain for the existence and better future of Poland, his and our land. What was the vision of Roman Dmowski and how did it differ from the one of Józef Piłsudski?
Józef Piłsudski believed that Poland should consciously support the creation of an independent Ukrainian state, separated from Russia and bound to Poland through a military alliance. As for the Lithuanian and Belarusian lands, he envisioned linking them with Poland in a federative structure. Roman Dmowski, on the other hand, argued that Poland should annex specific eastern territories that once belonged to the pre-partition Jagiellonian Commonwealth, thus ensuring favorable strategic borders while taking advantage of Russia's weakness. He opposed the creation of a Ukrainian state, considering it a major mistake, and this was a lasting point of contention between him and Piłsudski. Dmowski envisioned a national, unitary state. He firmly believed that over time, the Slavic minorities, Ukrainians and Belarusians, who would inevitably fall within the borders of the new Poland, would become Polonized.
What were Roman Dmowski's most important actions in the context of Poland regaining its independence?
When the world entered the war and, as a result, the Polish question once again gained international attention, Dmowski did not immediately call for independence. He could have done so as early as 1914, but he feared that such a declaration would discourage Russia from continuing the war. Dmowski wanted the conflict to last long enough to thoroughly weaken Germany. When the astonishing collapse of Russia occurred, Dmowski, like Piłsudski, though they never discussed it, realized that there was now a genuine opportunity not only to regain full independence, but also to establish a Polish state of considerable territorial size. This laid the groundwork for introducing the Polish question at the peace conference. Let us recall the declaration signed in Versailles by the Allied powers, which stated that Poland constituted one of the essential conditions for a just peace.
What was Roman Dmowski's general worldview?
Dmowski was a nationalist. Let us not hesitate to call him that. For him, politics was certainly not the art of love. He always associated politics with struggle and competition. It would be going too far to say he saw no place for moral principles in politics, but he undoubtedly valued strength above them. His main message to Western audiences was clear. Europe's stability required a new balance of power, and such balance could not exist amid chaos east of Germany. Russia had fallen from its status as a great power and descended into barbarism. Poland, he argued, should rise to fill the role once held by Russia.
In an interview for Le Matin, Józef Piłsudski said, "Is it necessary to be a dictator? I'm a strong man and I like to decide for myself. But when I look back at the history of my homeland, I really don't believe that you can rule with a whip. I don't like the whip." And yet, the method of a carrot and a stick was ever present in his actions. From father figure to an uncompromising chief of state, Józef Piłsudski had many faces, but taking under consideration 123 years of Polish servitude, they were all important for Poland. Who was Józef Piłsudski and why was he so important for Poland?
From an early age, Piłsudski became involved in various pro-social and pro-patriotic movements and had his stint with the Polish Socialist Party. There was little Marxism there. It was more about advancing the cause of independence. Socialism, in his view, was a tool to mobilize the lower classes toward the idea of a free Poland. Piłsudski's greatest achievement was ensuring that, here at home, we had an armed force capable of disarming the Germans and defending civilians against the Bolsheviks.
He came back to Warsaw on the 10th of November 1918, straight from a prison. Why was he imprisoned?
This stemmed from his vision of how the legions were to be used and the role they were meant to play in our history. In his view, the fight of the Poles on the side of Austria-Hungary was supposed to pay off at some point by leading to the creation of an independent state, while the legions were to become a regular Polish army, not just a paramilitary force. But at some point, Piłsudski realized that the Austrians were not keeping their promises. They were using Polish soldiers as expendable, sending them to dangerous fronts. In 1916 came the oath crisis. The legionnaires were to swear allegiance to the German Emperor, Wilhelm II. Though any other reason would have been enough to refuse that allegiance, it was about refusing to gamble with Polish blood for someone else's cause. In that moment, it was more advantageous for Piłsudski to become a political prisoner, as it increased his standing in Polish society. When Piłsudski finally arrived in Warsaw, contrary to popular beliefs, nobody greeted him with fanfare. However, he later recalled seeing along the way an older Jewish man sitting with a violin, surrounded by a circle of children playing 1st Brigade, the song of Piłsudski's unit. For him, it was a small sign of hope that he was returning to a Poland where the spirit of independence was still alive and could still be heard.
According to Józef Piłsudski, strength without freedom and justice is nothing but violence and tyranny. But freedom and justice without strength are mere chatter and childishness. But he, like nobody else, understood that a strong, free and just Poland should be an open and tolerant country, but most of all, a country that is aware of its history and diversity. Dmowski was considered to be a perfect diplomat. Piłsudski was considered to be a great soldier.
I think Piłsudski's greatest contribution was not just as a soldier, but as a statesman. A man who held his ground and commanded respect among world leaders. King Michael, the future king of Romania, recalled how Piłsudski was received by his father in an audience. At first, his father was somewhat reluctant to show him respect. After all, he was just a revolutionary, a socialist, while he himself was a crowned head. But when Piłsudski entered the palace and descended the stairs, it is said that such an energy radiated from him that in an instant his father stood and saluted him. Simply by his presence, he was able to inspire that kind of reaction in people.
What were the actions of Józef Piłsudski that led to Poland reclaiming and regaining the independence?
Above all, his legacy was the creation of an armed force, the legions, and the establishment of the Polish military organization, which operated secretly outside of them. As an organizer and a man of immense charisma, Piłsudski had the rare ability to rally others behind him. Even Roman Dmowski, despite their lifelong rivalry, admitted after Piłsudski's death in 1935 that he was indeed a true leader.
Independent Poland was very important from a national point of view, but why was it so important personally for Józef Piłsudski?
Before his first and last armed action at Bezdani, Piłsudski wrote a letter to a friend, a kind of farewell, in which he acknowledged the possibility that he might not return, that he might be shot. In it, he wrote that it was no longer about patriotism. Youth is reckless and foolish, he admitted. What drove him, he said, was something even deeper. I cannot accept living under the whip. I refuse to live in the latrine the Russians have made of Poland. Perhaps I will die, but I will die a free man. I will not allow myself to be treated this way.
In 1908, Maria Konopnicka, a great Polish female poet, wrote Rota, which soon became one of the most important patriotic anthems in our country. And it says, "We will not forsake the land we came from. We will not let our speech be buried. We are a Polish nation, Polish people from the royal line of Piasts." And it was a bit prophetic, because Poland regained its independence 10 years later. Unfortunately, our country needed many years more to get its full and unshackled freedom.